Dr. Coconut, look out, here he comes. Dr. Coconut, look out.
How's everybody doing? It's your boy Flipkicky here, and welcome to the anniversary update Risk of Rain 2 item and equipment tier list. This tier list will be ranked from tiers F to S, with one item from each rarity that I think is the worst being put in F, and those that I deem worthy being put in the S tier. This video will be the whites to the reds as part 1, and the second video that will be out shortly will be the boss items, the yellows, the orange equipments, and the blue lunars. Please keep in mind that this is my opinion. I have about 200 hours on the game. I play mostly on Monsoon, but also these items have been ranked with multiple things in mind. They've been ranked with the intention to fight Mithrix on stage 6, looping and going for god runs from stage 8 and beyond, and also certain multiplayer quirks. Risk of Rain 2 is not a vacuum. Even though some items may sound good, that doesn't mean in certain contexts that they are good. Also, runs going on in the background are for my Twitch at twitch.tv/flipkicky, so stop by and see some runs there. Without further ado, let's get into the whites. Okay, before we go into every single item, we have to go over how each item is ranked. I use 3 simple enough rules to decide where to put each item. The first one being the noticeability versus the ease of effect. How easy is the effect obtained? And when that effect is obtained, how noticeable and useful is that effect to your run? Number 2, usually the less thinking an item makes you do, the better it is. And number 3, how much are you going to prioritize picking up that certain item compared to other items of the same rarity that do similar things? So starting with the worst common item in F tier is the stun grenade. Now the stun grenade fits these qualities the worst. Even though the ease of effect is alright at 5% per hit, the same chance of proccing as a sticky bomb, the stun grenade's effect, on the other hand, is nowhere near as good. Although normal enemies, anything but bosses, are affected in being stunned for 2 seconds, what you could be doing during those 2 seconds is just damaging it and dodging it. Buying time is not a useful way of going about this game compared to just damaging something. It's just outclassed by every single item that will damage something instead of just buy time. So just because this item doesn't really hit bosses, it'd be useful against Mithrix, but it doesn't stun Mithrix at all. So there's really no reason to pick up a stun grenade. We could just pick up something else that'll just damage it instead and just don't get hit. That's really all it comes down to. Just use it for scrap. Moving on to D tier, we have the Warp Banner. Now the Warp Banner is an interesting case. However, there's like this fallacy that happens with every single person that plays this game. Once you start the game, you think the Warp Banner is the best thing ever. It's extremely noticeable. You see the dome, you feel better when you're running in it. But once you play the game more and more and more as a person with a lot of experience on the game, you barely notice them. You completely disregard Warp Banners to the point where you forget you have a Warp Banner the longer you play the game. And then you're just like, okay, I'll just scrap it. Because even though the movement speed is nice, it only carries that movement speed over a short area, so it really doesn't help overall. The attack speed increased by 30% is nice, however, attack speed can just be achieved by other means. It's just outranked by any other item that will give you attack speed. Next up in D tier is the Bustling Fungus. It's a priority pickup for Turret Engineer, and that is it. It would be unwise of me to not refer to Turret Engineer when talking about the Bustling Fungus, instead it's basically an A or an S tier item on Engineer. But other than that, that's it. The buff is nice. That happened because the fungus used to be only 2 seconds per healing, but now it's 1. You only have to stand still for 1 second compared to 2. However, there is no reason in a game that has a lot of movement and fast-paced combat that you should be standing still. The only reason you will use the fungus for healing is if you don't have any other healing. So since you only use it in emergency, it's just completely not prioritized at all. You have no reason to pick up a Bustling Fungus over any other healing item unless you are playing Engineer. So you can't you can't make an argument to rank it above D tier. Next up is the bundle of fireworks. It's noticeable only in God runs usually. It's only good in extreme late game. In 6-stage runs where you go to fight Mithrix, not that useful. Multiplayer, it's okay, but it's really only good if you're just going for like 15-stage crazy runs where you have like 7 stacks of fireworks and they proc everything. So it's really not the best. You appreciate the effect, but you don't go out of your way to stack it at all. No one says, oh, I'm just going to stack fireworks for a real purpose. Fireworks are only stacked for memes, so there's really no use ranking it any higher. Moving on to C tier, these effects are good, but usually not very stack worthy. So we're going to start with the bison steak, formerly the fresh meat, also arguably a C tier item. It's basically a quarter of an infusion without actually having to go and get kills. The HP is basically the least useful stat in the game. If you talk about attack speed, attack damage, movement speed, healing, and HP, HP is probably the worst, because you could just heal it all back, just don't get hit with the movement speed, or just kill things before they kill you. The bison steak is the definition of an average item. It just gives you some flat HP, it's nice, you really shouldn't go out of your way to stack it, it's not too much HP where you're like, oh, a bunch of bison steaks makes me super tanky. It's just kind of a nice little boost, and that's really all it does. Similar to that is the personal shield generator. It also kind of adds HP, but it makes your one-shot protection less easy to obtain. One-shot protection is somewhat of a hidden mechanic that if you take a massive chunk of damage, there's no one single chunk of damage that can one-shot you in the game. I know you feel like you get one-shot by Mithrix all the time on stage 2 of Mithrix, but that's because his hammer shot has shockwaves that come out of it, not just one damage. So it's multiple things that hit you at the same time, therefore you still die. But one single point of damage cannot kill you at once. So by adding health with the shield gen and the shields, the bison steak included also affects this. Adding the shield gen now, it's more health to get to that one-shot protection, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to obtain. It's useful when you use Transcendence because it'll stack on top of the shields, but that's really about it. It really has no significant major upside to justify using it over other items when you see it in a multi-shop or have the availability to print it. It's really just kind of meh. Next is the Cautious Slug. It's very good early game healing, but it falls off extremely hard. It helps out your healing in the early game a lot just by running around and not initiating with things, since less things will be spawning. However, once you really need healing in the middle of combat, this thing doesn't do anything. It doesn't help you during combat, which is when you'll be taking damage. So to heal with the slug, you have to run away from things, which wastes time, which means more things will spawn, and it can cascade very negatively in your run, which is why it's very useful early game or against the boss fight with Mithrix if you need to run away after taking a big chunk of damage, but that's really about it. It feels like a last resort option, which means there's no use justifying it higher than we have in C tier. Next is the Rusted Key. The buff with the Rusted Key is very good. It was basically a D tier item before it got buffed, but now it's literally a big chest every stage if you can find the box. It's a token to open the chest. You find the box, you open it, you have a 20% chance for a red or an 80% chance for a green. That's pretty decent. It's not really a B tier item since it's extremely inconsistent. The ease of getting the effect isn't too consistent at all, however extremely noticeable. It does require a lot of thinking to go and find the box, so it's just going to stay in C. Although the effect is nice, there's no use really putting it any higher. And the final item in C tier is the Monster Tooth. A very good C tier item, arguably can be put towards the bottom of B, but I decided to put it at the top of C since it is still outclassed by a few more healing items in the game. It's useful healing, but not overly stack worthy. You're not going to go out of your way to stack a Monster Tooth. Even though when you kill an item, the orbs spawn, you can see the orbs right there. The ease of effect is very, very, very high in the Monster Tooth. All you have to do is get a kill, run over, and grab the thing. They have slight tracking, so they'll magnet to you as well. They're really nice and easy to get. 2% HP of your maximum health when you pick them up. Decent healing, but not overly useful they're kind of useful in late runs, but your healing is so big. Your main source of healing is not your Monster Tooth. It's usually your Harvester Scythe or something else crazy that's getting your healing. The Monster Tooth is just kind of supplementary and more, again, of an emergency type healing where you go out of your way to pick the orbs up instead of just naturally getting it. So it'll stay in C tier or the bottom of B tier for now. So moving on to B tier now, these items are more or less stack worthy, but they're inconsistent effect or they're outclassed by another item. Starting in B tier is the backup mag. It's very good on certain survivors, like Acrid, which just spams his poison, or like Huntress, where you can spam glaives. But on certain other survivors, it's not useful at all. It's useless on Rex. It's basically useless on Captain since his taser is so bad. But it's just it's good on some, good on others. If it was good on everyone, it would be much higher. But since it's somewhat inconsistent of how its effect works, it's kind of just used for scrap sometimes on other survivors. It has a very high potential upside or a very low potential downside. It's nice to have on some survivors, but it's just not run defining. And because it's not run defining, it'll just stay in B tier. Next is the medkit, which is my opinion the best healing white item. Now that I looked at the tier list, there's not really as many healing items as the game as I thought there were. However, if I had to look at the whites and pick one, I would pick the medkit. The only spot where the medkit struggles is that it's difficult to use on its own. Since you have to wait 2 seconds to heal, it's a lot of going in, getting hit, going out gameplay, and it's not supplementary to itself like maybe the Monster Tooth would be. However, its effect, it heals more than the Monster Tooth does. And you don't have to kill things, you just get healing naturally. If you're doing damage to something big, you're taking chip. Plus, any form of damage will proc your medkit. You can get burned for 1 HP, and your medkit will go off for 5% of your HP. So, it can have more upside than the Monster Tooth or not. It's a debate, but I will usually side with the medkit 9 out of 10 times. It can struggle on its own, but it's great against the big hits. That, well, if you get smacked by Mithrix, you're already smacked across the stage, your medkit pops up, you're back up to HP, you can get right back into it. So it's useful for a majority of runs. So I'm going to put it in B. Again, there can be a debate, but I would say it's more consistent than the Monster Tooth, and it heals more, so I'm going to rank it higher. Next up in B tier is the Focus Crystal. It's necessary for melee survivors, but I wouldn't say it's run defining to put it anywhere higher. There's a difference between necessary and run defining. Run defining means the course of your run is changed once you get that item. Your mentality of how you approach fighting things is completely different once you get that item. It's necessary for melee survivors because that's a free damage boost to all of your attacks without even having to think. You would want a Focus Crystal over not having a Focus Crystal 101 out of 100 times. There's no reason to not want a Focus Crystal on a melee survivor. However, it's not so significant of an effect where it feels like you have to go out of your way to get a Focus Crystal. It's just you see a Focus Crystal, oh, I'm a melee survivor, let me just go pick that up. Not, where's the Focus Crystal? Where's the Focus Crystal? I need a Focus Crystal printer right now. It's just very, very nice to have on a melee survivor. The recent buff is also nice since it got buffed from 15 to 20% damage, so it's just straight up better than how it used to be. Plus, the red circle around your survivor makes it way easier to get the Focus Crystal's effect. Next up in B is a Sticky Bomb. It's very good early game damage, and it's easily stackable. 5% damage per hit, you stack it, gets 5% more damage per hit. On 1% proc coefficients, like 4 Sticky Bombs, 1/5 of your hits are just going to proc a Sticky Bomb that does a little bit more damage. It's just very nice for on-hit damage. It's just simply outclassed by other damaging items, and that's about it. Next up is the Gasoline. The explosion that got added to it in this buff feels very, very good. It's essentially a baby Will-o'-the-Wisp, but it falls off very, very hard in later runs where the Will-o'-the-Wisp just does way more damage and the burn is nowhere near as useful. Also, if you're going to go try and fight the final boss, it's useless because anything you kill isn't going to burn Mithrix. You're just single target fighting Mithrix, so your Gasoline isn't going to do anything. So there's no real use saving up Gasolines. You'll just scrap them before the final fight. So they're only good in certain types of runs. So they kind of just have to stay in B. Crowbar. The buff is helpful, however, Crowbar would have still probably been ranked in B with or without the buff. The problem with the Crowbar goes back to thinking too much for your items. It's probably the biggest offender of this. It's very annoying to play around because you want to keep something at high health, so your Crowbar does a lot more damage. However, if you have a good run and you're playing the game like you should be, you're setting up proc chains, which means everything is basically being damaged continuously, so everything is constantly being chipped by your ATGs and your ukuleles and your will-o-the-wisp flying around, so nothing is usually at enough health for your Crowbar to be effective unless you're playing something focusing single target damage like Loader and stuff as the such. So the Crowbar's effect is very, very good, however, it's very difficult to maintain. It's not an item that you should really go out of your way to stack, but instead appreciate if it's dropped for certain survivors, and just maintain the stacks of it. Don't really scrap it unless your proc chains are way too strong, and just go about your day. Now moving on to A tier. These items are very stackable with noticeable effects, however they're just barely not good enough to be universally useful to warrant an S tier ranking. First is the Topaz Brooch. Barrier is very nice. It's just free HP. That can't be leeched, you can't add it unless it's your items that are adding it. It can't be chunked off, it's just free HP. It's just there. Repulsion Armor. It's an S tier item for Eclipse, for Stage 8 Eclipse, when damage is permanent to a certain degree. Since it decreases damage when hits do a certain amount, it might just not even trigger the permanent damage multiplier, so the repulsion will just nullify certain chip hits to where you don't take permanent damage. It should be prioritized at all costs for those types of runs. However, for other normal runs, it's not as effective. Looking at the stats, the damage really isn't as much as you would think. It's just reducing all incoming damage by 5 per stack. It cannot be reduced below 1 damage. Every hit has to do at least 1. However, it can't be reduced too much once you look at the stats. They're stackable, don't get me wrong, and a flat damage reduction requires no thinking whatsoever. However, it can fall off if the stacks aren't maintained, so it'll just stay in A. Next is the Energy Drink. A fantastic item with an S tier effect, however, it's just not universally as good as the Goat Hoof, which I'll get to later. It will just always be fundamentally outclassed since it only affects sprinting as opposed to all movement. It's not as easily stacked, however, the stacking priority is virtually interchangeable. For whatever early game thing you see first, Goat Hoof or Energy Drink, you just pick it up for that early game movement, and it won't necessarily be as noticeable. However, in theory, the Goat Hoof is just better since it increases every form of movement, and that's just how it is. Sorry, Energy Drink. Next are the Armor Piercing Rounds. The most important item, arguably, if you are doing Mithrix runs. If you do not have Armor Piercing Rounds going into the Mithrix fight, you are shooting yourself in the foot. Straight up. Zero thinking is required. You get these, you do more damage to Mithrix. Easy. You get these, you do more damage on the bosses going up to Mithrix. Cool. But since not every single enemy in the game is a boss enemy, the Armor Piercing Rounds are naturally not universally useful. They're very, very useful for certain parts of the game and certain means to be achieved. However, they're not universal. Without at least one or two of them, you will have a very tough time taking out Mithrix. So for that alone, they're an A tier item. The Soldier's Syringe. This is another noob type item where they think it's the best item in the game. And again, it's an A tier item. It's not bad whatsoever, but some characters abuse attack speed way more than others do. It's even useless on Artificer basically. Engineer, once you just buy Visions of Heresy as soon as possible, it's not very useful on him either. So some characters don't really use attack speed all that much to warrant stacking syringes. And other forms of attack speed can supplement the syringes, so syringes really won't see deep stacks. You should really only get like 5 or 6 syringes because your predatory instincts will carry the rest of the attack speed. So they really aren't as universal as some people may think to deem an S tier rank. Okay, Editor Wade here. I am just completely realizing I forgot to talk about the tri-tip. Well, the tri-tip was an S tier in the previous patch, however, it was the victim of a nerf. Now that you require 10 tri-tips to completely cap your bleed on one proc coefficient attacks, the early game bleeding really isn't as good as it was, and that's really what separated the tri-tip from other attacking items. How noticeable and cataclysmic multiple stabs of tri-tips would just decimate single target damage. It's not as good as it was, however, it doesn't mean it's a bad item whatsoever. The bleed will fall off in later loops, but the fantastic single target damage is very satisfying to stack if your kit demands it. So it remains an A tier item, it's just not in the form it used to be in S tier. Now finally, the S tier for the common items. They have a universal effect with amazing stack capability. Prioritize these in printers and multi-shops if possible. First, the Paul's Goat Hoof. This is the best movement item in the game. It affects all movement for 14% instead of sprinting. It's just a simpler use case and just stacks better overall since it affects everything. Free, faster movement speed in the game, where not getting hit is very, very nice. The faster you move, the harder it is for you to get hit. The faster you traverse the stages, the faster you get loot, less things spawn per stage. Great. It's just an S tier item, simple as that. Next is the Tougher Times. The teddy bear's ability to straight up nullify any damage cannot go understated. 10 teddy bears, as a simple rule, is 60% damage nullification. You have a 60% chance on any damage that hits you, if you have 10 teddy bears, to just be completely nullified. That also includes blood shrines, so that's nice to have. Although it's not noticeable sometimes because you're not always paying attention to what your teddy bear is doing, the effect is far, far too good and far too potentially useful to your run to rank any lower. You don't go, oh, I see some teddy bears, I gotta buy them, because sometimes you need the damage. But they're just so good to just have, no matter what, at least one, that they're just an S either way. And the final S tier item, arguably the best common item, are the Lens Maker glasses. The Crit glasses literally straight up increase your damage by 10%. No questions asked. Zero thinking, very noticeable effect. Those red numbers are beautiful, and they will save your run just by having a couple. Trust me, that much damage increase is maybe not noticeable on paper, but is noticeable in game. The best playstyle in this game is to kill things as soon as possible with the least amount of thinking as possible before they kill you. This achieves that perfectly. They're the most easily stackable common. You get up to 9, you stop, you get 1 Harvester Scythe, 1 Predatory, and every single hit you do crits. Simple as that. It's the best of both worlds. So, that's the commons. Now, we'll move on to the uncommons. To start out the greens in F tier is the Squid Polyp. In my opinion, the worst item in the game. This item gives you absolutely zero value, proccing a squid turret that attacks nearby enemies for only 100% damage and only lasts 30 seconds when interacting with an interactable. So it's just fireworks, but worse. One burst of fireworks will do more damage than the squid will do in 15 seconds. The squid goes up and you just walk away. And there's no guarantee enemies are around you when the squid goes up. The fireworks will seek enemies out. The damage that the squid does is absolutely pitiful, and they aren't even permanent. If the squids were permanent, then it would be way better. But the fact that they just go away, it just doesn't help you at all. Just get a damaging item that just damages things, and you don't have to worry about a stupid squid. Just play around them. If you disagree with me, try and actually use your squid. Let me know how that goes. Alright, now moving on to the D tier. These items are just really inconsistent or really just meh. Starting off with the Lepton Daisy. I know. Everyone has those times that they can remember where the Lepton Daisy saved their ass and saved a crazy run. But out of all of the teleporters you have ever done, what would the save percentage really be? Like 5%? Out of 5% of every teleporters you've done, you've been saved by the Lepton? It's pretty low. I mean, the heal is nice, but it really doesn't help you whatsoever for the rest of your run, and then only might help you during a teleporter. I mean, 1 is always nice to have, but that's only if you're forced to really pick it up. You're not going to go out and actively seek a Lepton, so there's really no way to justify putting it higher then D tier. Next is the Old War Stealth Kit. Although it saw a buff in the recent patch and more of a rework, proccing when you go below 25% health, it's still an item that's only good in emergency. And since you will obviously go out of your way to prevent an emergency as much as possible, you shouldn't be relying on your stealth kit to carry a run. The movement speed is alright, and the invisibility is somewhat inconsistent because you can still be targeted before you go invisible, and you will be hit by the hit anyway. So it'd be better with a crazy movement speed boost. Like if it saw like a movement speed boost of like 60%, as opposed to what it does now, which I believe is 40%, then it would be better. But as of right now, there really isn't any reason to want to pick a stealth kit up. Next up in D tier is the Rose Buckler. I'm going to preface this by saying this is a B tier item on the Huntress, since she is always shooting while sprinting, but for every other character, when you are in combat, you are shooting, which means you are not sprinting. And if you're in combat, that is when things will be hitting you. So by that, if you're shooting in combat and things are hitting you, your Rose Buckler won't be up when you'll be getting hit, which seems counterintuitive to what the buckler is for. So therefore, half the time, the armor doesn't even help you in combat. It's nice on some fringe cases if you need to run in for a random item, but it's really far too inconsistent, and the armor is far too unnoticeable to justify a higher tiering. And the final item in D tier, which is arguably C, is the Corona Bottle. Almost a C tier item for the sole reason of the Death Mark, which I will go to later. That is the only reason why the bottle might be debatably the absolute bottom of C tier. But other than that, all it does is lower the movement speed of enemies, which is basically useless, because lowering movement speed does not lower attack speed. They will still attack you the same amount. The only difference is you can hit them kind of easier. That's it. For the C tier, for the green items, the way I think about the C tier for the green items is they're perfectly balanced. There's only 3 in this tier, but they all have a job, and they do that job basically perfectly, and are perfectly balanced. They're not too busted, not too broken. But if they got a buff, they could end up being broken. However, they're perfectly balanced where they are right now. Starting with the Red Whip. It's just the Red Whip. When you're out of combat, you move faster. It's perfect at its job, but really nothing else. It doesn't help you while you're in combat, but while you're out of it. It just helps you get loot faster and save time on stages, which makes less stuff spawn later. It's really not that exciting, so we'll just move on. Next up is the Bandolier. It's also perfectly average. It's annoying to actually use, since you have to pick up the box, which lowers its consistency, since it might drive you into a group of enemies, so you might not pick that box up, and it doesn't just automatically reset your cooldowns on certain kills. But it has a great effect. It's just locked by an annoying and sometimes inconsistent use case. And the cooldowns and getting and going and grabbing that box, it kind of makes the Bandolier useless past like stage 3 or 4, since there's so many dangerous things spawning that you really don't want to go out of your way to run into a group of enemies and grab that box just to reset some cooldowns. Like, it's kind of a waste of time. But in earlier stages, when resetting cooldowns, when you're having a tough time killing enemies quick, is very helpful. The Bandolier is a nice item to have. And finally, in C tier, is the Gorse Tome. It's almost a B tier item. I could see an argument for it being a B tier, and I would completely agree. I could see it being a B tier item. However, it fits the C tier trend of the perfect balance. Any buff to this item would make it busted. If the Gorse Tome gave you more gold or dropped at a higher rate, it would be busted and would be a must pick for early game items. However, how it is right now, the chance being relatively low and each gold piece equaling the amount of a normal multi-shop or normal chest on that stage, it is useful for early game, however not too useful. It is perfectly balanced the way it is. It's also useful to carry money over to next stages if you know that trick. If you hit the teleporter, there's a brief window once you're in the teleport animation, once you start like glowing blue and you hear the sound effect go off as it's porting you. If you pick up gold or get gold on the way to the next stage, it will carry that gold over. So if you have a Gorse Tome piece standing next to you, you're about to port, you turn blue, you walk over, pick it up, you take that gold over to the next stage, and you're basically already at a chest. It's nice, but the Gorse Tome, alas, will stay in C, because you're not always going to say, oh, I want a Gorse Tome right now. You just get one out of a chest, you're like, oh, okay, Gorse Tome. You're not excited when you're late in a run, but you kind of get excited about it early in a run. So that's it. Next on to B tier. these items have very high and very low swings. They're either very useful or very not useful, and there's something holding it back that swings it to that not as useful case. Starting with the razor wire. It's very useful in some cases, but can also put you in danger if you play it too aggressively. If you try and start proccing your razor wire, it goes back to the idea of you're thinking too much. The razor wire can cause you to think about proccing it a little bit too much or too much more than it should. Sometimes the razors it shoots out are kind of unnoticeable, but sometimes it's a screen wipe when your razors go out. So it really just depends the type of damage you're taking, how you're getting that damage taken. It's inconsistent in how it's used. Half the people don't even understand how it works or how the razors work. It's kind of confusing, but it's arguably an S tier item on Rex because Rex hurts himself when he, does most of his damage. So it's an S tier item on him. It just buffs his damage straight up. And if you're using the Hellfire Tincture Planula combo, the Hellfire Tincture is an equipment that damages you. Planula heals you when you get damaged. So if you have Razor Wire and Planula, it just heals you while your Razor Wire is going out. It's a very nice combo to have. But for now, the Razor Wire will just stay in B tier unless it sees any buffs in the future. Next up in B tier is the Warhorn. It would easily be an A tier item if the attack speed got buffed a little bit. However, I think it's perfectly fine the way it is. It's sometimes only as good as the equipment you choose, because usually larger or better equipments have longer cooldowns, except the capacitor. We don't talk about the capacitor, but like the Praeon. Let's say you have a Praeon, 140 seconds. Your Warhorn will go off every 140 seconds. But if you have a Blast Shower, which is not that good of an item compared to a Praeon, your Warhorn will go off every 20 seconds. So it really just depends on how good your equipment is, which detracts from the Warhorn's overall consistency. So although the equipment you use will affect your Warhorn's usability, it's not always completely useless. When the attack speed goes off, it's a nice attack speed to have. However, the equipment is what holds it back, therefore keeping it in B. Next, the Leeching Seed. It has insane ease of effect. You hit things, you heal. 1 HP, which is really not that much, and as we'll get into later, it's outclassed entirely by the Harvester Scythe if you have one single pair of crit glasses. One. That's all you need to make the Leeching Seed completely outclassed, and that's what holds us back. The Leeching Seed is great for early game healing. It's great for consistent healing. It's one of the most consistent items in the entire game. You hit things, you heal, but it's just outclassed, simply. Next, the Infusion. This is 4 Bison Stakes, but when it's locked behind, you have to kill things. So it's not the best for like 6-stage Mythics runs, because there's not as many things to kill. There's no use stacking 6 or 7 infusions because you're not going to get the chance to get into those infusions because you're not going to get that many kills. However, they're very fun to stack for long god runs. They're very fun to stack for even obliteration runs, so they're useful then. However, for shorter runs, they're really not as useful since you're not even going to get the chance to kill as many items to go deep into your fusion. So it'll just stay in B. Next up in B tier is the Death Mark. S tier potential, but it is the most inconsistent item in the game. You need 4 debuffs, which the Corona Bauble, a slow effect, counts as a debuff. Rex has 2 debuffs. Acrid has poison. There's burning. There's ice. There's a lot of debuffs, and it's hard to amass all of them. And it's really not something you should go out of your way to think about what debuffs you have. It's just kind of, you have a Death Mark, you just pick items up as normal, and if the Death Mark eventually starts proccing, yay, your Death Mark starts proccing. But you really shouldn't play around your Death Mark. Again, the more that the Death Mark starts making you think about the Death Mark, the less you're thinking about other items that will simply just do more damage for you. So don't really... The Death Mark can be prioritized, and some people that choose to play around the Death Mark see great effect, but it can also detract from your runs, because if you're picking items, like if you're picking a Gasoline just because it burns over a pair of crit, then you're shooting yourself in the foot. So that's kind of the issue you have to think about. Will you take the risk of prioritizing items for your Death Mark, or will you just take things that damage anyway? So that's why the Death Mark will stay in B. It has the S tier potential for doing 50% more damage to an enemy, and that stack being basically always kept up until it's dead. Or will it make you think too much and detract from the other items you pick up? It's really your call, but for now the Death Mark is just going to stay in B. And finally, the item in B tier is the Berserker Pauldron. It's a very good early game item when loads of wisps or beetles spawn, but it can fall off very hard when you get other forms of attack speed and other movement speed. The pauldron just becomes unnoticeable. It's got a high skill curve to master, intending to kill multiple items in quick succession. It's got a high skill curve to master when killing multiple enemies in succession, but a very good potential upside with the very noticeable effect when activated. So it's simply just a B tier item. It's got very good upside, but it's also gated behind some inconsistency and has the potential to be a much better item if it sees a buff, but I highly doubt that buff will ever come. Now the A tier. These items, just like the whites, lack the universal use cases that the S tier items have. One or two things holds them back that keeps them from being must picks any single time you see them. So without further ado, let's get to the biggest offenders, the ukulele and will-o'-the-wisp. I'm going to put these and rank them at the same time since they're very similar in what they do. They're integral parts of the proc chain trinity with the ATG missile. However, spoiler, the ATG missile is an S tier item while these two are A. Why? These two don't hit single targets very effectively. The ukulele will hit groups of enemies and are great for hitting groups of enemies, and the will-o'-the-wisps only go off when you kill something, which means if you're fighting Mithrix, they're useless. These two items, insanely stackable and undoubtable S tier items if you're going for obliteration or god like multi-stage, multi-loop runs, are useless while fighting Mithrix. The ukulele doesn't have anything to proc onto, and the will-o'-the-wisp, you're shooting Mithrix the whole time. Nothing's dying, and he's not going to get hit by the explosions. So they're useless for him. You will end up scrapping ukuleles and will-o'-the-wisp before you go into the Mithrix fight. So for that, you have to put them in A. They're basically invalidated for the entirety of Eclipse when you go get to Mithrix. If you just want to kill Mithrix normally, they're not useful. So for that, they have to be put in A tier. Next is the Kyoro Band, another sad case, a very useful item that you will see yourself prioritizing more than these other A tier items. However, the larger enemies just fall out of the fire tornado sometimes, which just makes it simply less consistent than the Ice Band. The Ronald Band just is better in every single way. It provides the instant damage and it doesn't let things fall out, so the Kyoro Band will just be an A, while spoiler, the Ronald Band will be an S. Predatory Instinct. It draws a very fine line between S and A tier. However, I have to put it in A when you think about how some survivors don't utilize attack speed. Again, it goes back to the Artificer and Loader and like Acrid issue that they really don't use attack speed. So the Predatory Instinct isn't as useful on every single survivor. The similar item is kind of partner in crime, another item that gives 5% natural crit when you pick it up. It's basically half a crit glass is the Harvester Scythe. Now, the Harvester Scythe is just healing for everyone. The Predatory is attack speed. So the Harvester Scythe you'd use on everything, while the Predatory you wouldn't really use on everything. It's very close to being an S tier item. I'd say more so than any other item in A tier. However, it's just barely not an S since it lacks the universal use cases that the S tier items have. Wax Quail. It's very good for movement with the easiest effects to get. You jump and it shoots you forward. However, it's a weird item because it's one of the only items that you just won't pick up if you get it out of a chest in certain cases. You should never stack Wax Quail past 3 of them unless you're doing something stupid. Do not stack your Wax Quail past 3 stacks because it will be uncontrollable and you'll be more fighting your Wax Quail than you will be fighting your enemies. So if you have a big run and a Wax Quail drops out and you already have 4 of them, you just won't pick it up, which is odd. And the just boost that it gives you is just very nice, very simple to get. It's always just a straight up buff to your movement. However, it's not that good to warrant an S tier ranking. Finally, the Guillotine. It's not too useful for short runs, obviously, for Mithrix. So it's the converse of the Ukulele and the Wisp. It's absolutely perfect. Actually, no, it's the same thing. It's not useful for Mithrix, however, it's very useful for larger runs. You kill the elites faster, your on-kill effects get procced earlier, that means more things on the screen will die, then more elites get killed faster, and it just cascades into more damage. So the Guillotine's just pretty nice. Then moving on to the S tier, again, universal uses, they're just really good items. Starting with the Fuel Cell, it gives you more equipment uses and lowers your equipment cooldown. Do I need to say more? and I won't, because we're just going to go right into the Harvester Scythe. With a single crit glasses, this is the best source of healing in the game. It averages out to about 1.5 HP per hit if you have 1 crit glasses. Also packs a natural half glasses 5% crit chance and stacks way better than any other healing item. It starts with 8 HP when it goes off and then goes to 4. So 2 of them give you 12 HP. It stacks insane. And it's contrary to the predatory instincts, it's universally useful in every survivor. Every survivor needs healing, but not all of them need attack speed. Hopu Feather. Jumping more than once and carrying momentum is far more important than some may realize. And having at least one for the Mithrix fight is crucial for evasion. If you make a wrong move, if he dashes in an unpredictable way, oops, I have my Hopu and he doesn't hit you. But if you don't, you get smacked and you die. It's very important for that fight. It helps get loot faster, it helps traverse stages easier, and it's extremely easy to use. You just jump. It's never a bad thing to have, and it's easily an S tier item. Runald's Band. Instant massive damage. I mean, I clarified it a little bit earlier in the Kiaro's Band. This thing is just an ice blast. Boom. Big damage, and it also does a minor slow, and the enemies can't get out of it. It just hits them. If you have a choice between an ice band and a fire band, you take the ice band unless you don't have a fire band. Then you always want both. But if you have an ice band and a fire band already and you want to pick one, pick the ice band. It does more damage more consistently. Always take the ice band over the fire band if you have the choice, if you don't, have both already. ATG Missile Launcher. This is the best green. This is the king of proc chaining. It's better than the Ukulele and the Wisp because it does more damage, and single target damage. 300% damage is nothing to scoff at all. 300% damage off of one hit and 10% chance to proc on 1.0 proc coefficient attacks. That is a crazy high proc coefficient for an item that does that much damage, that has a proc coefficient on its own that can chain into more damage. It is insane, and it's useful for everything. Since it's a single missile, you're pumping fire into Mithrix, the missile goes down, boom, Mithrix get hit, oh, your ATG procced another ATG, here it goes, boom, and you do more and more damage. It's just good. There's nothing bad about the ATG. It's a perfect, I wouldn't say it's a perfect item, but there's no downside to it at all. You just hit things, and it goes off, and it does more damage for you. And you stack them, and they do way more damage. They're just really good. It's the best green. So, with that, we're now going to move on to the final part of this video, the legendary red items. As the name would imply, most red items are very, very good. Thus, they don't come up very often. There's a 1% chance to get a red item from a normal chest and a 20% chance to get a red item from a large chest. Also, red printers are extremely rare, so these are more ranked on the hype you will have when they drop and how likely they are to actually be useful to you if you are lucky enough to get one. Starting with the worst red in F tier, the Happiest Mask. This is basically a squid polyp, but red. You'll start to see now, as we go into the boss items, which also have more of a minion type effect, these items that spawn things just aren't good. The Happiest Mask simply doesn't do enough damage with the ghosts that it spawns, and they don't distract from enough attacks nearly as much to warrant any usefulness out of this item. Every other red gives you some utility, and this has only has a small chance, a 7% chance of spawning a ghost, when other items work way more than this does and help you way more. This thing just really isn't all that helpful. Moving on to the D tier reds, there's 2 of them, starting with the Interstellar Deskplant. It's kind of a meme, but the mask is definitely worse than this. The Deskplant is obviously not good, it's still in D tier, but it's definitely not the worst red no matter how much people like to meme it. Sometimes the healing is nice, but honestly sometimes you're moving way too fast, or the healing is so lame that it doesn't heal you. You have to stay in those pools of healing for a decent amount of time for them to start proccing, so you really don't notice the healing that they give. Sometimes it's helpful, but it's really not that helpful all too much. If it healed way more, it would be better, but they're just kinda painfully average, and painfully average for a red item is bad. These are supposed to be legendary items with great effects, so if you're just average it's kind of just like having a normal item, which is not that good for a red. And the next item in D tier are the head stompers. These are somewhat justifiable as a C tier for the added jump height and the floatiness, but also conversely, they're a D tier for the added jump height and the floatiness. The fact they also negate fall damage is very, very useful, but that added jump height and floatiness, in my opinion, is so goddamn annoying. You get used to jumping with the Hopoo and the Wax Wheel. You play this game for so long, you get used to how the jumps feel. Then you throw this in the mix, and you're floating and jumping. You feel like you're never hitting the ground. You feel like you don't have control of your character. To me, I fight the head stompers more than I fight the enemy sometimes. Negating fall damage is great, and this is a B or A tier on Eclipse with the fall damage modifier, because fall damage will kill you in Eclipse after a certain modifier. So these things are very nice to have, especially when jumping down from the Mythics arena, because some characters don't have a way to negate their fall damage, like Captain, for example. So if Captain has head stompers, he doesn't die. However, the massive hit that these things give if you try and land the damage, because these things don't just negate fall damage. If you press the button, you slam from super high up, but it's hard to land. With all the wisps and the brass contraptions flying around, you'll probably hit one of them before you'll actually land a hit. The hit is satisfying, but these are far too consistent and far too annoying half the time to warrant being exciting if these end up spawning for you. Moving on to C tier with Nukahana's Opinion. This is only good if you have decent healing and you're healing a lot, and even with that healing, the damage is pretty lackluster. Don't get me wrong, it's funny with Bungus turrets just constantly healing each other and these things constantly shooting out. It's great on that, but again, that's another fringe random engineer case where an item's good, and that does not warrant a higher tiering just because it's kind of funny and good on one character. It's really, again, average, and average for a red is not good. And there's just many better reds that require far less thinking and setup than trying to plan a lot of healing and shoot out the skulls. Just get a red that does more stuff and is less lame. Wake of Vultures. Any effect is better than no effect. Again, it's average, so it's just going to be put in C. It's pretty consistent past stage 4, since there's a lot of elites going around, and the elites' effects really aren't that good though. If the elites' effects are really, really good and very useful, this would be a better item. But since they're pretty lackluster in the effects that they give, the Wake of Vultures won't see any higher placement than C tier until the elite effects that are given are buffed or something like that. Moving on to B tier, Aegis. I honestly felt that it was on a different level than C tier, so I was going to have this in C tier actually just before I started recording this, but I'm making the executive decision right now and moving it up. The lack of consistency sometimes with the overhealing aspect holds it back, but it's a good item once you start realizing how useful the barrier gameplay could end up being. If you have a dummy amount of healing, the Aegis is a crazy item. You'll double your health bar in barriers. You'll have like 4,000 health running around with an Aegis and never dying. Like, sometimes the upside of the Aegis is far too good to put it in C tier. It's also not completely useless. You'll overheal sometimes more than you think you would. If you're good at not taking damage, you have a Harvester Scythe kind of carrying your healing. You're overhealing to about a quarter of your HP plus whatever brooches you're getting. So the Aegis can have a potential upside, but it's also kind of boring. So I'll just put it in B. Then our good buddy, the Frost Relic. After the incessant buffs from Hopoo, the Ice Homie is finally moving up in the tiers. It's got extremely good consistency because it just gets better when you kill things, and it's very noticeable since it's a giant ice storm flying around you. However, the ice storm always feels not good enough in damage department. No matter what, the ice storm always just feels like it's not doing enough damage. It's buffed, so it does more damage, does way more damage than it used to. Way more damage than it used to. So it's B tier for now. Maybe if they keep buffing it, it'll keep going up higher, but it's better and does more than the other reds so far do. Just, it kind of lacks the damage to be warranted for a higher tier. Moving up to A tier. Yep, we are already here. You would expect the legendary items to be good, would you not? And we're going to start with a weird one. We're going to start with defensive microbots. I know this is for Captain only, but I'm going to rank this in the hypothetical that it was an item that every survivor could pick up. You notice this item way more than you would think. It saves your ass from brass contraption balls, massive vagrant shots, stray Lemurian fireballs. It's a fantastic defensive item that would be useful in every single survivor if that were the case. Sadly, it's not, but this would be an A tier item if every survivor could pick it up. Daggers. This is a similar case to the ukulele, and the Will-O-Wisp, but not completely. Yes, these also don't hit Mithrix, but the daggers really aren't as consistent with their screen wiping as they are usually foretold to do. They might sit for ages and not shoot at something, or just kind of do some tickle damage and do way less than you thought they were going to do, and just not proc anything. Once you take a step back, they really aren't as powerful as some may think. These are still a very powerful item. In the right hands, and with the right proc chains, these are an S tier item. But if these are trying to carry, if you have just daggers and nothing else helping them, they're really not that good. Daggers aren't just going to pull up and straight up carry your run. That's what S tier reds do. They pull up and carry the run. Daggers with a little bit of help can carry. It's still obviously an A tier item though, so please put your pitchforks down, okay? It's a good item. It just needs a little bit of help to start going sicko mode. Soulbound Catalyst. This item is a couple seconds away from being an S tier item. 5 seconds would be nice because 4 kills, boom, you have your capacitor. 10 seconds, 2 kills, you have your capacitor. But right now it's 4, which is not bad, but the way this gets ranked in my head is the problem of human error. You can only realize your equipment is off cooldown so much. As long as you are manually pressing your equipment button to make it go off, this is an A tier item. If you have a gesture, the Soulbound is undoubtedly an S tier item since your equipment will just go off for you. But a human can only realize their equipment is off cooldown so much and stay on top of incessantly pressing their equipment once it keeps coming off cooldown once you keep lowering the cooldown. So if you are manually using your equipment, which is more often than not, this is an A tier item. But if you have a gesture, this is undoubtedly an S. Resonance Disc. This was my first red item, fun fact, that I ever picked up. And also, I am still confused how this thing works. No one knows how this thing works. Sometimes it feels like you get 30 million kills and it won't shoot at things, and sometimes you get 2 and it starts shooting out rays of death. But it kills things fast, and it shoots things for massive damage. And it's very satisfying when that damage goes off. So it's an A tier item. It does big damage. It does more damage than the Frost Relic will do. It will do more damage than your Wake of Vultures or Nuka-Hanas will do. So it is an A tier item. You can kind of put it in the category of the buddy or spawning things, and if you are putting it in that vein, it doesn't have a health bar, so it doesn't show up on your left side of the screen. But if you are categorizing it like that, this is the best, quote, buddy item in the game, because it does so much damage, and it doesn't go away. So I'm going to put the Resonance Disc in it because I really don't see it going anywhere else. Brainstalks. Kill them elites and go crazy. It's obviously a fantastic item for God runs or obliterations because so many elites end up showing up. And it's still useful even in the shorter runs where you kill Mithrix. It's just simply a good effect, but not really an S tier effect since it's gated behind the elites. If it wasn't gated behind the elites, it would be broken. So it's gated behind the elites. So Brainstalks is just an A. Alien Head. It's also a simple item, kind of similar to the Brainstalks. There's no proccing required for this one. It's just simply use your cooldowns more and go about your day. It's just a good effect, but not to a broken degree. So it's an A. Dio's Best Friend. Some may argue that this item is much worse, and this is a very difficult one to rank, and I can easily see the argument of it being lower. But the fact that it lets you die twice is way too good not to mention. Yes, it could be another red that actually helps you not die, and it may go against some of my ranking logic prior, since it might make you think a little bit more, or it's just not helping you during your run. However, you still do have the opportunity to get good enough items where not having another red that's doing more than the Dio's is might not matter as much. Again, I can easily see the argument for it being lower. However, off of personal experience, having a Dio's is a good thing to have, more often than not, and you will usually never regret having one. Usually, if you get a Dio's, you're like, oh, okay, I wish this was a insert S tier red item here. But once you die to some bullshit thing, you're like, oh, fuck, the run's over. And then you're like, oh, never mind. I have a Dio's. Cool. So you usually forget about it until you realize, oh, that's actually great. I get to keep going because my Dio's just saved my ass. So from how it's made me feel during my runs, I would put Dio's in A off of personal experience, but I can easily see the argument for being lower. We're going to start with the Hard Light Afterburner, which is out of the ones here, I would say probably the worst S tier, and I can see, again, an argument for being lower in A tier. But this item, to me, is so blatantly abused on some survivors that it has to be S tier. Captain, Loader, Bandit, Huntress, Engineer, Acrid, and Mercenary, all in my opinion, downright abuse this item to the point where getting one can change the course of a run or change a playstyle. Captain gets more of his orbital strikes, which are the main source of his damage. Loader gets more punches. Yeah. Bandit gets to go invisible longer, where his invisible is practically permanent. Huntress gets 9 dashes if you're using multi-blink. Yeah, you basically never get hit. Engineer gets more harpoons, which are way more damage for Engineer. Acrid gets more leaps, which insanely increases his mobility. And Mercenary gets more invincibility dashes. Come on. You just downright abuse your runs if you get a hard light on those characters. On other characters, it's not as helpful. But the fact that it's so blatantly abused on those certain characters when you get it, I might even be forgetting one. But the fact that those characters abuse this item so much puts in S for me. Shattering Justice. This destroys tanky single targets. It spreads around too because it can be proc through on hits, so everything can be getting shattered at the same time. It's a very good effect behind easy to achieve consistency. Just hit it 5 times, and with most survivors, they can easily just start proccing their shattering with multiple on hits, good single target damage. Their shattering just starts going off to keep racking up more and more damage. The damage exponentially increases. Once you start getting an exponential damage curve, the more you hit a boss, the more damage it starts taking. That's when you know your run is going well. And obviously it's good on the final boss, but Mithrix, when he dashes, gets rid of his shattering. So if Mithrix isn't spamming his dash, or you start pumping your damage at the right times when you know he's not going to start spamming his dash, it's very, very good. Rejuvenation Rack. Your healing is doubled. All of it. Yeah. It just doubles your healing. Yeah. Brilliant Behemoth. I would stand to reason, besides, maybe 1 or 2 other ones. This is everyone's favorite red to get. Not because it's fantastic. It is an S tier. It's not the best red. But who doesn't love explosions? Really. It's just, again, like it's the crit glasses, it's a straight up flat damage increase. You just get more damage when you hit shit. It just does boom, 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 more damage. It feels great, it looks great, it sounds great, especially on multi and commando. But it's just fun. You just go, haha, explosion time, and you just boom, everything. It's fun. Everyone loves the Behemoth. If you say the Behemoth isn't an S, you're just a hater. Tesla Coil. You kill shit for free with your movement keys. You just move around, it goes zap, 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 pracks your on hits, keeps your chains going. You just put your hands behind your head and just let it kill things for you. The only problem with it is that it takes 10 seconds. It's off for 10 seconds, on for 10 seconds. If it was less, oh boy, this thing would be busted. If it was on all the time, on for 5 seconds, it's stupid. Just wait patiently for it to go off, kind of play around it when it's not on. If you're really in trouble, and you will feel the difference it makes. This is one of the items that 100% changes runs. Because if you're not doing enough damage, you can run away from things, come back for 10 seconds while it's on, get your damage, run away for 10 more. This could save a run and have you start pulling it back if you play around your Tesla Coil properly. Meat Hook. Okay, I know this is similar to the Dagger, Ukulele, and Will-o-the-Wisp issue, where it's useless against Mithrix. You would think it'd be ranked lower. But this is all 3 of those items on steroids. The on-hit chance is just as much as a ukulele, and the damage is far greater and hits way more enemies. So the fact that it's just a better ukulele, an A-tier item, in every single way justifies that this is an S-tier item. Plus, the fact that you can have this, a very rare proc chain item, on top of all your other, way more common, on-hit items, makes this the sweetest of bonuses to have on top of any crazy proc chain you might already be building. The Meat Hook is very, very good, and it is a run-changing red. It's an S tier. Finally, the 57 Leaf Clover. This is the best item in the game. Your thing doesn't proc right? Okay, let's just re-roll it. Oh, it procced now. Great. It's a flat-out Massive damage increase. More than the crit, more than the behemoth. It's an insane damage increase because it doubles any on hits or any crit you may already have. It could be up to a 50% damage increase from the crits alone, not even counting all the proc chains. Because if you have 5 crit glasses, you have a clover, you have capped crit now. You just increased your damage by 50%. You have a ukulele, you have 1 ukulele and 1 ATG. Oh, their chance to hit now is doubled. Whatever damage they're doing now is doubled. That means your proc chains last for twice as long, and meaning they do twice as much damage. This also causes you to stack items less, because now you only need 5 crits, you only need 5 tri-tips, and stuff like that. It's half of what you normally may need. Therefore, you save twice as much scrap and get a more diverse item pool because you're using your scrap on more different things. This cascading positive effect is unmatched by any other item. It is 100% consistent, as it is always working, and you can feel the boosts, making it the easiest possible attainability with very high noticeability. And there's no thinking required. This is simply the best item in the game, and every run that is blessed with a clover should be taken very, very seriously. With that, the commons, uncommons, and legendaries are all finished. This is my first attempt at making a longer video like this, or an informative video like this. If you have any comments, any questions, any critiques, please leave them in the comments below. I probably said at the beginning, allergies are kicking in. Any heavy breathing or whack mic quality that you may have experienced during this video, I apologize. I tried to keep the whackness to a minimum. Hopefully part 2 gets out shortly, but this video is probably going to take me upwards of 10 to 15 hours to put together completely. I just hope you like it. If this was at least a little bit informative and helpful to you, I'm happy. I wanted to get my opinions out there, try and be a little bit more informative when it comes to this game. So thank you, and I'll see you guys in part 2 whenever that comes out. Peace.